may seem that 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 people put on these events continuously. It is in reality a partnership of many different groups, including Tusculum, including Dixon Williams, including Nathaniel Green Museum, and certainly the National Park Service, former members of the Battle of Blue Springs Planning Committee, current members of the Victorian era performers, and I represent groups from the East Tennessee Civil War campaigns who our only goal is to keep our heritage alive and to, from time to time, take opportunities like this to present to you, and I certainly thank you for being here today. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce another one of the partners who is continually involved in helping us put together living history programs, presentations, and lots of educational opportunities, and that's Dr. Robert Orr, who probably needs no introduction.
Sort of set the scene for Johnson's little talk as he's leaving Greeneville in June 1861. The secession crisis of 1860 began when the Republican Party won majorities in both houses of Congress and the presidency. By fall 1860, the Republican Party would be setting the agenda and passing the laws. With that, the Cotton States, the states of the Deep South, began to discuss withdrawing from the Union. And they began leaving the Union in December 1860 and continuing into 1861. In February 1861, Tennessee voted against a convention to consider secession, and that held until the attack on Fort Sumter and Lincoln's call for troops. Then the question became, could the central government coerce a state? And a lot of people in the southern states believed that the answer to that was no. The Tennessee legislature proposed a plebiscite on separation from the Union to be held on June the 8th. Democrat Andrew Johnson and Whig Thomas A.R. Nelson toured in East Tennessee together, speaking against separation and in favor of the Union. Johnson was burned in effigy at Tusculum College. He was hooted out of Jonesboro, which was one of the few Confederate areas in Upper East Tennessee, but was well received in the small villages such as Elizabethton and Rogersville. Before the vote, a convention in Knoxville met and adjourned without any recommendation. A second meeting was set for Greeneville to open on June 17. On June the 8th, the statewide plebiscite was carried by secessionists, particularly in Middle and West Tennessee, with East Tennessee contributing a solid vote against separation. Andrew Johnson, then a U.S. Senator, had attended the Knoxville Convention and was planning to attend the Greeneville Convention, but because of the fact of the Tennessee secession and an increasingly hostile atmosphere, he decided to leave the state and assume his seat in the federal Congress. He left Greeneville on June the 12th, or some other sources say June the 14th, and would not see his hometown again until 1869.
On this, the occasion of our parting, I only have words for you to describe what we already know. We are in the midst of a civil revolution, such as is unparalleled in the history of nations. This is not the time for long, entertaining speeches, but a time for us to reflect together soberly as men of reason, as men of common sense, hopefully as men of courage, to stand together as one, to turn and face the approaching storm. Secession is the cause of the present crisis. Let there be no argument about that. Secession has brought us to where we stand today. Since that is what we are going to discuss, let us understand what secession is and what it actually means. Secession can be traced back to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve seceded by hiding themselves from the approach of their Creator. And its skulking, cowardly, insidious presence can be detected again and again and again throughout history down to the present day. The reference was just made to Fort Sumter and President Lincoln's response to that event. Let me tell you why that event helps us understand what secession actually is. Imagine, if you will, the tremendous threat represented to the city of Charleston by the 60 or 70 men forming the garrison of the fort at Fort Sumter, and how Beauregard blasted them into surrender along with his brave band of rebels. Secession is nothing more than a pretext for what has been planned all along by the Southern leadership. I begged, and I ask you today, to think, what rights has the South lost under the folds of the Stars and Stripes? I asked this question of my colleagues in the Congress as they were giving their valedictory addresses and resigning their seats. Show me the cause for your actions. Why are you leaving? What rights, as citizens, as states, as slave owners, have you lost under the Constitution? They could not. They did not. They cannot make such a show. Fort Sumter tells us what secession is. It is one of a cascading series of events whereby federal forts, arsenals, treasuries, post offices have been confiscated by rebellious citizens in an act of war against their duly elected government. Where shall we look for the definition of secession? We shall look to the Constitution. And what I have just described to you in the Constitution is described as treason. Secession is treason. And those who promote it and attempt to carry it out are traitors to their country. Now, many of my Southern colleagues like to refer to the conflict that is already on us as Mr. Lincoln's War. Mr. Lincoln's War. And yet, who began it? Who fired those first shots at Sumter? Confederate forces. They began this, and they will have to deal with the consequences. They objected to Mr. Lincoln because he was a man who arose from the ranks of the people to the office of Chief Magistrate. Now, another pretext has been used to justify the current set of circumstances, and that is slavery. My friends, there is not now, nor was there ever, any threat to slavery posed by the new administration. And if, in fact, there was, if my colleagues in the Democratic Party representing the southern states had attended to their duty and remained in their positions, they could have blocked anything the new administration wished to do, but they did not. The threat to slavery is a phantom. Now, it is no secret, I am no hypocrite. You know I am a slave owner. But I am no abolitionist. But I will tell you this, there has been more threat to our country by secession than by all the abolitionists put together since we came together as a union. This threat to slavery, which is simply a pretext, has been used to foster an atmosphere of fear, intimidation, violence, which exactly accounts for the suppression of the loyal Union voices of Middle and West Tennessee, creating the so-called secession vote, which has brought us to the present moment. I believe that if the people had been able to express their opinions freely, they would never have agreed to this action. The people of East Tennessee have stayed loyal. They represented this by their votes at the ballot box, more than 2-1 in this region against separation. And I fear that because of that vote, which exposes their loyalty, which brings it out into the open air so that it can be seen by one and all, that they will be subject to the same violence, intimidation, and threats as have already occurred in the western part of our state. My friends, I am not particularly for Abraham Lincoln, but he was elected to his office by the constitutional process. He has done well thus far. And if he continues to uphold the Constitution and the laws, I will sustain him. And so will you, my friends. I go now to Washington City to plead the cause of my people here in East Tennessee, to arrange with all of my power to provide for their relief and their saving from this treasonous rebellion that is now upon us. As I go through the state of Kentucky, I shall exhort our brethren there to stand shoulder to shoulder with Tennesseans, just as we did at New Orleans under the great General Jackson. And I hope that you will all have the courage to keep in our hearts the words of our great General Jackson, who said, "The federal union, it must and shall be preserved." I take my leave of you. I leave my wife, my family, in the capable hands of my sons-in-law, but I trust into the coming storm you will all stand together and take care of one another. Now is no longer the time for words. Now is the time to fight for what we believe, even at the cost of our heart's best blood. Thank you.
Johnson left Greeneville in a carriage driven by the minister of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, Reverend John P. Holtzinger, escorted by 2 federal military officers. A banner proclaiming "A. Johnson Traitor" was hanging from a downtown hotel, but the national flag still flew at the courthouse flagpole. As Johnson rode through Bean Station, a local Confederate leader tried to raise a militia force to capture him, but not a single person turned out. As they rode through Cumberland Gap, they heard a shot in the distance, but there was no additional events connected with it, and they rode into Kentucky peacefully. Johnson stopped occasionally to make a fighting speech about the hell-born, hell-bound secession movement. He arrived in Washington, D.C., where he conferred with President Lincoln and threw himself into the struggle to preserve the Union. He was soon authorized to fund secret Unionist groups in Confederate Tennessee as the war progressed.